Hey there again, Douglas Scott McCarron. Um, this may seem like kind of a sidetrack because I've been talking about internal psychology and the cocoon of beliefs and assumptions that we live in, but it actually fits in, and it's about the myth about the trial of Galileo. I was a theology student as a minor and a history student as a major, and one of the things I've always heard about is, the deep, dark, evil Catholic Church suppressed scientific study and purposely made a martyr out of Galileo. And yet, when I got into school and college, I discovered this wasn't really true. A couple of books I want to refer you to. One is called The Sleepwalkers by Arthur Koestler. As you can see by the taping and everything on it, mine's kind of worn out. And another one is called Galileo, Science and the Church by Jerome J. Langford. The thing that's interesting is Jerome J. Langford was actually, I believe, a priest in the Catholic Church. Arthur Koestler was an atheist communist. He's also known for a book called Darkness at the Break of Noon, I believe is the title of it, about the Soviet Revolution. And he went over there to support it in Russia and Soviet Union and became very disillusioned and came back. If you can find later editions, it's interesting because in the footnotes, they argue with each other, where they point out each one's description of what happened in the trial of Galileo is wrong, and then they offer points of view. Now, the thing about the Sleepwalkers, it's not just the trial of Galileo. It's actually the history of understanding cosmology and things like that, starting with the Greeks and going all the way up to Newton. And so it ends up, sorry, I was having a thought there. But the reason why I'm pointing at the trial of Galileo is one of the beliefs that is commonly passed on is that trial was about Galileo trying to assert science and getting rid of mystical darkness and beliefs. And as you read through these books, and in the class I was in, it starts out first with Copernicus, which I found interesting. Well, you have this thing called the Ptolemaic system. It's a whole understanding of how the heavens and the earth fit together. A lot of you know about this. The earth is in the center. All the sun and the planets go around the earth. It's the center of things. And the heavens are only not that far up in the air. And this came out of Aristotelian time. A lot of people say it comes from Aristotle. It's called the Ptolemaic system. But basically, it had been in charge and that the whole view of the world was based on the Ptolemaic system. Before it, there was another view. It was a scientific advancement. But then, it kind of went along. But it was also very clear to people that it's very complicated. Because, we now know that the planets are going around the Earth. And so as they're going this way, everything looks cool. But when they start going back up in the sky, it looks like things reverse. And then they come back around again. And then they reverse. And how mathematically do you explain that? So they came up with these things called epicycles, where it's everything. This is very complicated math on making it all work. And so there's a lot of dissatisfaction with it. The first person who really came up with not necessarily the first person that came up with a different idea, but that came up with a really accepted concept of changing this was Copernicus. Tycho Brahe was in there too, but Copernicus kind of got accepted. Odd thing about Copernicus, everyone has this other thing about Copernicus being suppressed, is that he also was, I believe, a Catholic deacon. And he got an award from the Vatican for his explanation that challenged the Ptolemaic system. So the Vatican's giving him an award. It's not like they're negative to it. But they also, didn't know quite how to express and change things for the common people. Now, it's true, the common people had this whole view of, sorry, I have some wires here I'm dealing with. Common people had this whole view of, yeah, we're the center of all things. But the people who were in college and had been trained, to understand math and everything, they knew something was weird. Their eyes told them one thing, like we're the center, but something was weird. When you get to Galileo, a lot of people think he's the one who actually put the sun in the middle of all things, and then everything went around the sun and explained it all. That was actually, I believe, Kepler, and then Newton. It's actually Newton who put it all together. But Galileo's system, he moved it, when you read it, it's like in the Ptolemaic system, the sun went around the Earth like all the other planets did. Galileo had all the planets go around the sun, but then the sun went around the Earth, which massively complicated the whole mathematical structure. And it was like made the whole thing a big mess. So everybody just rejected Galileo. And Galileo had this massive ego. So he challenged the whole thing. And he tried to prove it he did this thing like, if you can't disprove it, then you have to accept it. And then he made this statement, as the church is always taught. He's trying to bring in the Catholic Church as a defense of himself. And the church never taught that if you can't disprove it, you have to accept it as truth. But he also, by doing this, suddenly set himself up in a theological fight that was going on between the Dominicans and, I believe, the Jesuits about how to interpret the Bible with the new scientific information. And so that's how he actually got on trial, was he made a false claim about the church. And when you read the documents that I showed you, you find out that he was officially warned by a Cardinal Robert Bellarmine. And that was his first hearing. His second trial, he got in trouble because he kind of ignored his warning. He wasn't told that he couldn't teach what he had to say. He was told he couldn't claim it was truth. And so he went back and wrote a second dialogue in which he pretty much claimed it. And then he had this passage where he said, there are things that man knows, and that's in the realm of men, and then there are these mysteries that only God knows. And I'm paraphrasing a lot here, but anything that we can't understand is a mystery only God knows, and it's in the realm of that. The problem he got into is it was done in the form of a dialogue where he had these two guys discussing the new world order. And then there was the fool. His name is Simplisticus, Simpleton. And he's the one who says, what's in the realm of human beings, what we know is what we're allowed to know, and then what we don't know, only God knows, and we can't understand it. The thing is the Pope had made such a statement to Galileo publicly. And so Galileo was basically calling the Pope a simpleton and a fool. And I can't remember which one it was. I do remember he was I believe, the only Pope who had a statue made of himself. He honored himself before he died. Popes had big egos back then. People were, you know, like us. We all thought we know what was truth. We're all caught up in our own ego stories. So the Catholics, the Protestants, everybody was caught up in it too. So they put him on trial for that. They didn't put him on trial for his scientific beliefs. They put him on trial for ignoring the warning not to call it truth and for associating the Catholic Church with his things and then failing. But they didn't stop him from actually doing anything. You also have to remember, in the middle of all this is during the Protestant Revolt, and Luther, I can't remember who it was. I think it was either, I can't remember if it was Kepler or Galileo or Copernicus, but he referred to them as that Babylonian astrologer. Which, if you know anything about the Bible, calling Babylon took the people of Israel into bondage and used astrology. So the Bible claims. Who knows what the Babylonians really thought? But it's a big insult. And they actually, there was a suppression of, I believe it was Copernicus's book, and a lot of people have always said it was the Catholic Church, but it actually came out of the Lutheran system, because that's where it was published, is in the Lutheran territories. So you got this whole political fight going on between the Lutherans and the Catholics. You got a fight going on between the Dominicans and the Jesuits. There's all this turmoil, and everybody's like, it's kind of like, I don't know, historically, we always have people arguing over whose big explanation of the universe is the right one. The possibility that none of them are doesn't seem to occur to anybody. Right now, I don't know how long this will be on the internet, but right now we have a big fight going on over our president, and everybody's making up stuff and calling each other liars, and they all believe their lies. But none of this was true. So anyway, Galileo goes on trial again. He gets convicted, and he was imprisoned. I believe it was in the Duke of Sienna's summer villa. Now, I always had this, the story I always heard is he's in chains in this dark dungeon. But, he was in this Duke's palace, and I believe he had handmaids, he had a mule, and he was forbidden from leaving the bishopric of Rome, I believe it was. It's been about 30 years since I read this. But, the bishopric of Rome at the time was about maybe a third of what is now Italy. So he wasn't like terribly restricted. He was watched over by, I believe it was a bunch of monks. He went blind, and then he wrote the book for which he is known. This is after the trial, after he's been convicted, and while he's being watched. And the book came out, and it was sent to the Vatican to check, because he'd had this trial against them, and they cleared it, and it was put out and published. And one of the things the book never mentions, but which I've always been intrigued by, is how did he write the book if he was blind? He must have had somebody helping him. Somebody who was educated enough to, A, understand the language, understand the math, knew how to read and write. And the only people around to do that were the monks, the Catholic monks who were watching him. Now, it's possible he had some Confederates, some other supporters came in and helped him. But they were also being watched by the monks. So there wasn't like a big attempt to suppress him. It actually sounds to me like he was helped. So we've created this big myth about Galileo, this suffering, a guy who was suppressed and he didn't have, he was suppressed for his scientific beliefs. This all comes from later on people who were revolting against the authority of the church and created the whole, science is in charge and the ultimate authority on things. They just used Galileo as, their icon to prove how horrible the church was and how stupid it was and backwards and unthinking it was. And granted, at the time when they were doing this, the church was reacting and trying to maintain control because, that's what human beings do. But, it was all untrue. He was not forced to recant. He, from what I understand, he was so personally humiliated when his whole defense of how the whole thing works was, the proof that he was right is he used tides. He believed that, if I recall exactly, the sun pulled on the land, like it was a big landmass, and it pulled it through the water. And that's why the tides came up and went down. As opposed to the moon and the sun are working on the water in order to make the tides move around. I believe that's accurate. So the question then was, why are there two tides? Because in order to do that, you would have the sun and the moon go around the earth twice in one day to make that work. At which point his whole theory collapsed, because that obviously wasn't true. He became embarrassed. He went from being the biggest ego in the world to he had, we've talked again about internal cocoons and ways of seeing ourselves and judging ourselves. He went from being the smartest guy in the whole world who challenged Aristotle to one to, oh my God, I'm stupid, and he collapsed. I think this is what happened. And then he offered a recantation of the whole thing. And the judges accepted it, which is kind of an interesting thing because the Dominicans, as I recall, were supporting the Ptolemaic system. The Jesuits were supporting the new system, supporting Galileo's system. Jesuits and the Dominicans are fighting with each other. And the Jesuits, who were part of the examining committee who were judging him, whether this was all true or not, were not happy that he brought a recantation in. Dominicans loved it because it proved they were right. Again, everybody's using our own words and beliefs to prove what truth is, which is really just a bunch of words and beliefs. He was made to recant from that, and his public recantation, they took him to an abandoned little church down in the ghettos of Rome. He stood in this, literally, you can imagine an abandoned church. The ceiling's kind of falling in, there's dirt, there's dust. And there were like, I think a Jesuit or Dominican, and I can't remember the other. There were a couple of priests and bishops there, and he recanted. He didn't go out in public recant it. He didn't write a letter to the general population. He just went to this room and recanted. And then they sent him off to the Duke of Sienna's summer villa, where he suffered in chains in a massive, this large, massive, walk around and look at villas that belonged to dukes and duchesses. They're not little dark, moldy cells. And again, he wrote this book for which he is famous, afterwards, in the hands of all these Dominican and Jesuit and other types of friars and monks who were educated, and apparently it went through fine. So there wasn't any problem with writing it. He just got caught up in this theological debate. That's where he got in trouble. It wasn't the science. So, why did I talk about all this? So, we have it, we're quite often told that, he was the martyr of being crushed by the church in defense of science. And, back then, people believed that the earth was flat, and everything went around the earth and on and on. The thing is none of that's true either. So, the earth is flat. All you got to do is walk up on a hill and look out to sea, and you can see the curvature. The Greeks had been teaching, I think, since 600 BC. They had figured out the math that the earth was somewhat circular or oval shaped. That was taught in universities. It was taught in the Catholic Church. It was taught in the Protestant churches. The other thing, just to really kind of hammer this home, the Trial of Galileo, I believe, is in the around 1615, somewhere in there. So 1615, he's on trial, and we say everybody thinks the Earth is flat. Everybody in Europe, I don't know what the Chinese and everybody else thought. So that's 1615. In 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. Columbus sailed out of Spain, pretty certain that the earth wasn't flat. He got to the Americas, slaughtered some Indians, claimed a bunch of stuff, doing what human beings seem to do. And the main thing is 1492 is a long time before 1615. The Magellan expedition, which sailed all the way around the world and came back, I believe was in the 1520s. Now, Magellan died during a battle. I can't remember where it was. I want to say what is now the Philippines. I'm not certain, but there was this fight because the Europeans were already in there, that part of the world, taking over colonies, and there was a fight against the rebellion, and he got killed in it. But the remainder of his group finally came back around and proved the Earth went all the way around in a big circle. It wasn't flat. 1520s is way before 1615. It actually, I suspect, I've never actually found the date Galileo was born, but that's like probably before Galileo was even born. So, people didn't think the world was flat during the trial of Galileo. They hadn't thought it for a long time. But there is this interesting thing that goes on. Well, first off, let me finish this off. So we have this myth of what goes on with Galileo. We use it to support our own presumptions and arrogance, poo-pooing all those people back there in the past. They didn't know what was going on. We're the ones who know what's going on. We're the ones who understand. And that's what we do. We use it, the famous straw horse, where you sit there and you beat on something and make it wrong, and it's its fault. And this whole way human beings are, it shows up in a lot of the Greek writings, it shows up in the Republic, it shows up in Aristotle. Like Aristotle claimed we learned everything there was to learn and there wouldn't be anything more to learn. Now, seems to me we've invented a lot of things. We're flying around in space now. Weren't doing that back during the time of Aristotle. But they did seem to know a lot about how human beings are. So maybe that's what he was talking about. I don't know. Anyway, so we use this trial of Galileo as a way to prove we're superior and poo-poo all those old people and make them wrong and dismiss all of their understandings and explanations of life so we can be right and have it our way. And this is like, of course, the vast majority of us don't. I don't know how many of you all actually think about this. A lot of people I know just want to go out and dance and drink beer and look for someone to make out with and do the wild thing. But this myth is here. It encourages us, what's the point? Those people are all stupid. Don't look over there. But there's actually a lot of pretty valuable awareness in our history. But back to this flat earth thing. This is one of the things I learned that really fascinated me. Why that was taught. And the more I got into it, now I'm looking at my theological training. It's important to note that there's a difference between the word earth and world. The earth is this rock that we're floating around with that has water on it. It's been known for a long time it was curved. That's, anybody who knows anything about Western history, and again, I just know Western history. I don't know what they taught in the Far East or in the Middle East or other places. I just know that in our scientific background, it's been known. Well, it was assumed and asserted that it was curvature. It wasn't until Magellan actually sailed all the way around that they actually had proof. So that's the earth. The world. The world is, remember, I've been talking about this cocoon of understandings and self-reflection and everything. That's the world. It's our internal view of how things are. And I have this, I haven't found it recently because a lot of dictionaries seem to equate the world and the earth. But back when I was going to college, the dictionary defined, not as the first explanation, but about the third one, that the word world meant remembrance of a man. Remembrance. Take your members and put them back together. Or how I think, I have a bunch of thoughts about you and I put them together. That's a remembrance. Or how I think about myself. I assemble all these different stories and remember them, reattach them all together. That's the world. And it's the one that's flat, not the earth. I remember there was a symbol. It's like this, you may have seen it. It's a drawing. And it's flat, kind of a circle around. There's like table legs under it. Excuse me, I'm about to sneeze. Oh! Okay, I hope I didn't blow up your speakers with that. But on it, it's very highly detailed, and then when you get to the edge, things fall off into the unknown out here. Underneath it, the drawing I remember is there's a frog and a tortoise holding it up, and the frog has a crown on his head. It's a princely frog. It's the self-importance. It's all about me. I'm the one. I define the truth. I define all things. That's the tortoise, or that's the frog. The tortoise is slothfulness. Don't look over there, go slow. Why look over there? Why should I be curious? So our world is held up by slothfulness and self-centered, regal, and self-importance. And off the edge of the world is nothing. And you can see these images of boats falling off and disappearing. That's the world. Anything outside of our world doesn't exist. That's the reason why when we bump into people from other cultures, we're like, golly, that's stupid, that's dumb. Or, wow, that's kind of interesting, but, I don't understand it. Or, let's get a car bomb and blow them up because they're different and kill them. But the interesting thing is, in the Bible, in Aristotle, in Hesiod, in the Quran, in Buddhist readings that I've read, all things come forth from nothing. The nothing, that's the end off the edge of the world. Everything comes forth from the void. In the beginning, the earth was without shape and without form. And then God said, let there be light, and poof, that's the way they wrote it. But before God said that, everything was without shape and without form. No thing, nothing. And so, again, back to my theological training, a lot of Catholic mystical thought aims you toward that. There's the cloud of unknowing. You're going off the edge of your world, all of your self-definition, all of your explanations, all of your understandings and feelings into the nothing outside. One of the, a lot of the monks, a lot of the mystical monks would get in trouble because they asserted that whatever you believe God to be is just your story. It's not God. In a way, you have to quit believing in God in order to find the real thing, because the one you worship is your own self-opinion. And you have to let go of that in order to find the real thing, the real God. Which, there's a lot of books written about that. There is a God out there. It also happens, again, when I went through I had a transformation where I was my big internal story and it went silent. And it was kind of like suddenly I became, instead of this big explanation, this big personality, this big story, I became no one. Now, I want to be clear, you may be able to tell by what I'm talking about. I have an education. I know how to think. I'm a bookkeeper. I'm a classical musician. I program software. So I have a really good handle on how to think and arrange thoughts and make patterns work. The hard part for me was realizing those weren't me. They were just the way of arranging thoughts and comprehending the world. And with that, actually declaring things into existence. With my guitar, I would sit there and out of my knowledge of music theory and, of course, 10 bazillion hours of practicing, of course I'm exaggerating, I would just improvise music and compose it because I understood how it all worked. But that's not me. And so the whole thing for the mystics was to go get off of off of the self-worshipping, slothful world and step out into nothing where you just find the all, the everything. And that's part of what Galileo was talking about. That's what the whole argument that was going on between the Protestants and the Catholics. The whole argument going on between science and everything. What the heck is going on here? We have our explanations, but what's really here? And, most good scientists will tell you things are theories. A lot of people try and take theories and turn them into facts and then diminish and poo-poo and, denigrate people who have religious beliefs or scientific beliefs that are different than. It's like people are arguing, a lot of times people don't even really understand the science. They'll just take it and use it as a point to argue with people and be right. And then there they are, back on their world, their self-worshipping, slothful world, being right, stuck inside their little cocoon of thought. But there is something out there. Personal experience. And I've had people poo-poo and say I've made all this up and thinking, but that's just them coming up with an explanation to reinforce their world. All I know is I'm calm and peaceful. And I used to be mean, vile, and arrogant, and vindictive, and self-hating. That didn't change because of my awareness of Galileo and the myth. I'm just using that as an example of we create a myth, we believe it, we use it to prove our view of the world is right, but it isn't. Again, historically, Galileo was in the 1650s. Magellan was around the 1520s. Columbus was 1492. all before Galileo. They didn't think the world was flat. That's what we think they thought. Just another myth we use to prove ourselves that we're right and the people that don't agree with us are dumb. Okay, thank you.